At 91 years old, Ed Asner finally admitted the truth. For decades, fans believed his bond with Mary Tyler Moore was as warm and genuine off-screen as it appeared on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Their chemistry seemed effortless. The gruff Lou Grant and the determined Mary Richards, a pairing that turned into one of the most beloved relationships in television history. But behind the laughter, rumors followed them. Stories of tension. Whispers that their friendship wasn't what it seemed. For 40 years, Ed stayed silent. He never corrected the speculation, never revealed what really happened, until near the end of his life, he finally confessed. And what he revealed about Mary, about their working relationship, about the private struggles hidden behind the cameras, left fans rethinking everything they thought they knew. In the early 1970s, television was changing. The old family sitcoms of the 50s and 60s, neat suburban homes, husbands in suits, wives in aprons, were beginning to fade. America was restless, different, searching for stories that felt closer to real life. And then came The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Premiering in 1970, it didn't just introduce a new character, it introduced a new kind of woman to primetime television. Mary Richards was independent, single, and carving out a career on her own terms. For many women, especially those in their 40s and 50s watching at home, it was revolutionary. But Mary Richards wasn't alone in that fictional Minneapolis newsroom. She had a boss, Lou Grant. Loud, demanding, quick with sarcasm, Lou was the opposite of Mary's soft-spoken determination. And yet, when Ed Asner stepped into the role, something clicked instantly. On screen, their dynamic was magic. Audiences couldn't get enough of the way Lou growled his way through an editorial meeting, only to turn tender when Mary's confidence wavered. It was the heart of the show. Two people from different generations, different temperaments, teaching and challenging each other in ways that felt authentic. The success was immediate. By its second season, The Mary Tyler Moore Show was already being hailed as groundbreaking. Critics praised Mary's charm and strength, but they also pointed to Asner's Lou Grant as the perfect counterbalance. He gave the series grit, realism, and a reminder that authority figures didn't always have to be wise or noble. Sometimes they were flawed, gruff, and deeply human. Together, Ed and Mary created a relationship that transcended television. Viewers felt as if they were watching a genuine friendship evolve in real time. Behind the curtain, however, things weren't as simple. Ed Asner was a seasoned actor, older, with years of stage work and supporting roles behind him. Mary Tyler Moore was already a household name, thanks to The Dick Van Dyke Show. Their approaches to the craft were different. Mary rehearsed meticulously, often striving for precision and perfection in every scene. Ed worked more instinctively, relying on raw emotion and his natural intensity. To the outside world, those differences looked like chemistry. Inside the studio, they sometimes led to friction. Stories began to circulate, quietly at first, among those close to the set. Crew members noticed how Asner and Moore often kept to themselves once filming wrapped. They were professional, yes, but not particularly close. The easy warmth viewers saw on screen didn't always extend beyond the soundstage doors. In fact, there were days when Ed's bluntness rubbed Mary the wrong way. He was outspoken, political, unafraid to challenge writers or directors if he disagreed. Mary, who carried the immense pressure of not just starring in the show but also producing it, preferred order, calm, and efficiency. The clash was subtle, but it was there. At the time, nobody wanted to believe it. Fans wrote letters, describing how much they loved the family feel of the show. Women looked at Mary and saw themselves. Men looked at Lou Grant and saw a figure they recognized from their own workplaces. The idea that the actors themselves might not share the same closeness was quietly pushed aside. The illusion mattered more, and for 7 seasons, that illusion held. Decades later, Ed Asner would finally admit what many had suspected, that the bond between him and Mary Tyler Moore was more complicated than fans realized. He acknowledged that they respected each other's talent, but they weren't always friends in the way people wanted them to be. Yet in the early 70s, none of that mattered. Together, they were creating television history. The show was winning Emmys, redefining what women could be on screen, and cementing both of their legacies. Still, the seeds of tension had been planted, and though audiences couldn't see it yet, the truth behind their working relationship was far less simple than the scripts suggested. By the mid-70s, The Mary Tyler Moore Show had become more than just another sitcom. It was a cultural phenomenon. The series was winning Emmy after Emmy. Mary Tyler Moore was hailed as a pioneer for women on television. And Ed Asner had turned Lou Grant into a household name. For millions of viewers, tuning in each week felt less like watching actors and more like visiting familiar friends. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the whisper. Television was a small world in those days. Cast and crew stories spread quickly, and while most never reached the front pages, they circulated among insiders and industry gossip columns. One of the most persistent rumors was that the easy warmth between Mary and Ed wasn't quite as effortless behind the scenes. Viewers assumed they were as close in life as their characters were in Minneapolis, yet the reality was different. Mary carried the enormous weight of the show on her shoulders. Not only was she the star, but she was also deeply involved in production decisions through her company, MTM Enterprises. The pressure was constant: ratings to maintain, scripts to polish, expectations to meet. Mary's perfectionist streak often meant rehearsals stretched long into the evening, with every line delivery scrutinized. Ed, meanwhile, was wired differently. He thrived on instinct, preferring a looser, rawer style of performance. When Mary pushed for multiple takes to achieve her vision, Ed sometimes bristled. He wasn't shy about letting people know when he thought a scene was being overworked. Those clashes didn't always remain private. Writers recalled moments when Ed's booming voice could be heard from across the set as he argued for a different reading of a line or pushed back against a rewrite. Mary, graceful and controlled, rarely raised her voice in return, but the tension was palpable. For crew members and fellow cast, it was clear that while Ed and Mary respected each other as professionals, their working relationship wasn't without strain. Tabloids began to pick up the scent. A few articles hinted at artistic differences between the stars. The language was careful. No one wanted to tarnish the golden reputation of the series. But the message was unmistakable. Something wasn't as perfect behind the cameras as it appeared on screen. Fans reading those reports often dismissed them as gossip. After all, the chemistry they saw each week seemed undeniable. Yet to those close to production, the rumors carried weight. Ed's personality fueled some of the speculation. He was passionate, outspoken, and deeply committed to causes outside of acting. He was known to bring his political views into conversations on set, which sometimes put him at odds with those who preferred to keep their work and private beliefs separate. Mary, who bore the brunt of public expectations as America's sweetheart, leaned toward restraint and careful image management. The differences between them were real, and sometimes sharp. Still, the magic of television is powerful. The cameras rolled, and something happened. Their differences, instead of destroying the show, created a tension that audiences adored. Lou Grant's gruff exterior softened whenever Mary Richards stood her ground, and viewers leaned in, believing they were watching genuine affection. What they didn't know was that those same moments were born out of two actors who often struggled to meet in the middle once the director called cut. For decades, fans wondered which version of the story was true. Were Ed and Mary the close friends the show suggested? Or were they professionals who never quite clicked when the cameras stopped rolling? Ed Asner kept his silence for years, never denying the whispers, never confirming them either. It wasn't until late in his life that he would finally confess the truth. The rumors, at least some of them, were not entirely wrong. By then, the show had ended, The awards had been won, and Mary herself had passed away. The myth of their perfect friendship endured for most of those 40 years, but as Ed began to reflect more openly, the cracks behind the illusion came into focus. On screen, the relationship between Mary Richards and Lou Grant was a revelation. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't family, it wasn't quite friendship either. It was something new, a bond built on mutual respect, clashing personalities, and a surprising tenderness that made viewers feel like they were witnessing something genuine. Week after week, audiences tuned in to see Mary brighten Lou's grim outlook, or Lou cut through Mary's optimism with a blunt truth that somehow came from a place of care. For many, it became the emotional core of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. But when the studio lights dimmed and the sets emptied out, the reality was not always so warm. Mary Tyler Moore, beneath her sparkling smile and graceful composure, was carrying burdens most of the audience never saw. The pressure of running MTM Enterprises, the strain of being a female star in a male-dominated industry, and her own battles with health and personal challenges all weighed heavily on her. She demanded excellence because she had to. One slip could risk the fragile balance she had worked so hard to create. Ed Asner, by contrast, had his own struggles. He was a gifted actor, but also a man of uncompromising convictions. He often clashed with producers, fought over creative choices, and had little patience for anything he considered false or unnecessary. Where Mary tried to maintain a sense of control, Ed leaned into chaos. He believed emotion and instinct mattered more than polish. It was a fundamental difference in style, one that on screen looked like magic, but off-screen sometimes felt like oil and water. Those differences weren't invisible to the people around them. Cast members remembered moments of silence that stretched a little too long after a scene wrapped. Crew members recalled the way Ed would storm off when he felt a director had wasted his time, or the way Mary's smile would fade once the cameras stopped. They were professionals to the core, neither allowed their tensions to derail the show, but the warmth that viewers believed was effortless often required effort. And sometimes it wasn't there at all. As the show's popularity soared, those who knew both stars found themselves caught between two worlds. In one, America adored Mary and Ed as the heart of the most progressive sitcom of its time. In the other, there were whispers of strain, of quiet disagreements that never reached the public eye. It was a delicate balancing act, protecting the illusion while living with the truth. For fans at home, there was no question. They saw Lou comforting Mary after a disastrous date, or Mary standing up to Lou's growl, and felt certain the two actors must have shared that same affection away from the cameras. To learn otherwise would have been unthinkable. The power of television was in its ability to blur those lines, to convince viewers that the bonds created in fiction were identical to those forged in life. And in the case of Ed and Mary, that illusion held for decades. Yet as Ed aged, he became more candid about those years. He admitted, without bitterness, that the closeness people assumed wasn't always real. He respected Mary, he admired her, but they were not inseparable friends. There were stretches of time when they barely spoke outside of work. There were days when their professional disagreements left them distant. For 40 years, fans believed in a perfect bond. The truth was that it had been more complicated, more human, and perhaps more fragile than anyone wanted to acknowledge. The public saw Mary Richards and Lou Grant as symbols of loyalty, trust, and affection. The reality was that Mary Tyler Moore and Ed Asner were two very different people, bound by their craft, creating something larger than themselves. And that difference, the space between image and reality, became the heart of the rumors Ed would later confirm. For decades, Ed Asner dodged the question. He gave the usual polite answers when reporters asked about Mary Tyler Moore. He praised her talent, her brilliance, her role in shaping television history. He repeated what fans already knew, that the Mary Tyler Moore Show had been groundbreaking, that Mary's influence as both star and producer was undeniable. But the one thing he never addressed directly was the rumors, the quiet, persistent suggestion that their off-screen relationship was strained, that their warmth on set was more performance than reality. He never confirmed it, never denied it, until near the end of his life. In his 90s, as age slowed him down and reflection became unavoidable, Ed grew more candid. The sharp edges that once fueled his outbursts had softened into something closer to wisdom. And when asked again about Mary, he didn't give the usual stock answer. This time he admitted what fans had only guessed at. The rumors were true. Ed explained that he and Mary were never especially close away from the cameras. They worked well together, yes. They had respect, yes. But they weren't the inseparable friends people imagined. There were stretches during the show when they barely exchanged words beyond the script. He acknowledged that Mary's perfectionism sometimes clashed with his instinctive style. He confessed that his own stubbornness made matters worse, and he admitted that more often than not, their relationship was professional rather than personal. What shocked people most was not the admission itself, but the honesty of it. For 40 years, fans had clung to the idea that Lou and Mary's bond extended beyond television. To hear Ed finally confirm that this wasn't the case left many unsettled. Yet Ed didn't speak with malice. He didn't tear Mary down. Instead, he spoke with a tone of regret. He admitted that, looking back, he wished he had told her how much he admired her. He wished he had been more open, more generous with his praise. He recognized that his bluntness had built walls between them, walls that didn't need to exist. He also spoke to the deeper truth behind their distance. Mary, he said, carried burdens he never fully understood at the time. She bore the weight of being a female star in an era when everything was stacked against her. She struggled privately with health issues and personal loss, while projecting the perfect composure that audiences adored. Ed, focused on his own battles with producers and his political activism, admitted that he didn't always see what Mary was carrying. He realized too late that her exacting standards weren't about ego, but about survival in a world that demanded more from her than it ever did from him. In those late reflections, Ed gave fans a more complicated picture of their partnership. It wasn't the seamless friendship of television legend. It was a working relationship, tested by ego, strengthened by respect, strained by unspoken frustrations, but ultimately bound by the shared creation of something historic. By confirming the rumors, Ed wasn't diminishing what they had achieved. He was, in fact, deepening it, showing that what looked effortless was the product of struggle, difference, and persistence. What lingered most from Ed's admission was the sense of unfinished business. Mary Tyler Moore had passed away in 2017. Whatever words of reconciliation might have been exchanged were left unsaid. Ed's confession came too late for Mary to hear it, too late for the two of them to sit down and acknowledge what their partnership had meant, not just to the world but to each other. And perhaps that, more than the rumors themselves, was the truth that weighed on Ed in his final years. At 91, he confirmed what fans had whispered for decades. But he also revealed something more profound, that even in tension, there was admiration. Even in distance, there was respect. And even when friendship never blossomed the way fans believed, their shared work created a legacy that neither could have built alone. By the time Ed Asner finally spoke candidly about Mary Tyler Moore, decades had passed since the two of them had stood side by side in that Minneapolis newsroom set. The show had ended in 1977, its cast had gone on to new projects, and television itself had changed dramatically. Yet the image of Lou Grant and Mary Richards remained fixed in the minds of millions of viewers. It was a relationship that belonged to a specific cultural moment, one that still resonated 40 years later. And with his late-life admissions, Ed gave that legacy a new layer of meaning. Fans had always assumed the affection they saw on screen was rooted in a real-life friendship. The revelation that Ed and Mary weren't inseparable didn't erase the magic of what they created. If anything, it underscored just how remarkable their performances were. They had taken two very different personalities and turned them into one of the most beloved duos in television history. The fact that it hadn't always been easy made the accomplishment even more extraordinary. For Ed, there was no bitterness in looking back. His reflections carried the weight of regret, yes, but also gratitude. He acknowledged that Mary's high standards forced him to stretch as an actor. She challenged him, and the friction between them pushed both of them to heights they might not have reached otherwise. It wasn't the story of perfect harmony, but the story of two professionals whose differences created something timeless. Mary, for her part, had left her own reflections before her passing in 2017. She rarely spoke publicly about conflicts, preferring instead to celebrate the ensemble that made the Mary Tyler Moore Show so beloved. But in her silence, there was an unspoken truth. She and Ed had carved out something unique, even if it wasn't as warm behind the scenes as fans wanted to believe. When Ed finally confirmed the rumors, it forced audiences to rethink their memories of the show. The revelation didn't diminish the affection viewers felt for Lou and Mary. Instead, it humanized both actors. It reminded fans that what they were watching wasn't a documentary of friendship, but a crafted piece of art. The laughter, the lessons, the moments of tenderness, they were all real in their impact, even if the relationship fueling them was more complex. In a way, Ed's confession brought closure. It ended the speculation that had lingered for 40 years. It allowed fans to see Mary Tyler Moore not just as a radiant star, but as a woman who shouldered immense pressure and sometimes clashed with those around her. And it allowed Ed to finally unburden himself of a truth he had carried for too long. His words didn't tarnish their legacy, they deepened it. Today, when fans revisit those episodes, they do so with a fuller understanding of what lay beneath the surface. They can see the tension in certain scenes, the unspoken distance, but also the brilliance of two actors who refused to let personal differences undermine their craft. The legacy of Mary and Ed is not one of flawless friendship, but of resilience, professionalism, and the ability to create something unforgettable, despite imperfection. In the end, that may be why their story endures, because it reflects the reality of human relationships, complicated, layered, sometimes strained, but still capable of producing beauty. Ed Asner's late-life confession didn't shatter the myth of Lou and Mary. It transformed it, reminding us that even fractured bonds can leave behind a lasting light. Ed Asner waited until the very end of his life to say the words fans had long wondered about. At 91, he confirmed that the bond between him and Mary Tyler Moore was not the seamless friendship people imagined. Their relationship was complicated, tested by ego, tempered by respect, and marked by stretches of distance that fans never saw. And yet, even in admitting the truth, Ed gave their story a kind of beauty, because it showed that greatness doesn't require perfection. It requires persistence, honesty, and the willingness to create something larger than yourself. For Mary, that meant carrying the weight of expectation and breaking barriers for women in television. For Ed, it meant owning his flaws and recognizing, at last, the admiration he had never spoken aloud. Together, they built a legacy that outlived both of them, a reminder that even imperfect partnerships can leave behind extraordinary light. For more emotional stories, check out this video.